Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a wonderful time to actually see all of you here gathering this morning. I understand it's about 700 people gathering in this particular room. I think this is probably the largest gathering in our 14-year history. We have a very distinguished list of panels here, which I don't intend to give a very long, elaborated introduction because I think we're about 10 minutes to say. I'm going to actually try to recover the time that we have. And on our stage in the far right, Professor Jia Qingguo, who's of course the former Dean of the School of International Studies at Beida, or Peking University. Now, he's the one person that many leaders in the multinationals and in the policy world, when they go to Beijing, will want to actually call on him in order to get his good counsel. Next to him, another man that has become an SOP must stop in Beijing for leaders in the multinational policy analyst world. And the particular arena is Jörg Wuchter. And he's a 30-year veteran in China and has run two massive giant of a German industry in the corporate world, and now emeritus president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce. And next to him is just a gentleman that really requires no introduction, Ambassador Extraordinaire Qin Chia-yun. He was Singapore's ambassador to a number of countries, and let me get this right, Thailand, Germany, Japan, China, and he was also our representative in Taiwan over a massive decades-long of distinguished career in diplomacy. And next to him is my good friend and colleague, Cesar Purisima. He was, of course, the former Secretary of Finance in Philippines and also a distinguished Asia Fellow of the Milken Institute. So the organizers have been very kind in giving me the theme, and let me try to get this thing correct. Openly Plenary Pathway to Clarity, Charting the Future. Now, with a theme like that, I take it as a license for me to ask any questions I want. But that would not be a challenge to the massive collective wisdom of the panelists on stage today. My first question is for you, Jörg, if I may. Last year, China was only the third largest export market for the European Union at about 9% of the overall EU export, behind US and UK. On the other hand, the EU was the largest export market for China at 20.8%. So it seems that China needs the EU market much more than the other way around. Now, last year again, the Chinese investment into Europe, and that is EU plus the UK, was euro 7.9 billion, and the lowest in about 10 years. However, the cumulative EU investment into China over the last 20 years was about 170 billion euro. Now, this is roughly the same amount of EU companies investing in the US in 1 year. In other words, what the EU invested in China over the last 20 years is about the size of EU companies' investment in the US for 1 year. And that tells us why the US is so critical to the EU economically. Now, even if the Chinese economy may not be as alluring as it once was, yet as we speak, multinational leaders are once again visiting China. I know you've been very busy, and I understand that Professor Jia also has been very busy of late. So for them, meeting you for good counsel has become a new SOP, of course. Now, the recently concluded International Business Leaders Advisory Council for the Mayor of Shanghai, now in its 35th year, was attended by 30 business chiefs, chairmen, and CEOs from all over the world, but most of them European. So perhaps there's something that more than meets the eye. So Jörg, you have spent 30 years in China. You've seen it all. You've seen the up and downs and everything. So tell us, should investors long or short China?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. The question that I always phrase in Beijing these days is, shall I stay or shall I go? If you know the Clash song, that's the challenge we're facing right now. Well, we have a discussion in Europe about being too dependent on China, and companies get requested by NGOs, by parliament, or by others in order to reconsider to diversify away from China. The problem is there is not much to diversify from, as Robin put it. Take trade, for example. Europeans love Chinese products. Every year, European, and when I mean European, is 27 European Union member states, have 6.4 million containers coming from China. And we unfortunately just have 1.6 million containers going into China. So the ratio that is 3.2 to 1 is now in the first half even of this year, 3.9 to 1. So we nearly have 4 containers going west and 1 container going east. That's of course not very sustainable, hence would explain also why they're looking into subsidy case for an EV. Your point about 170 in the US 1 year, 170 as a stock from European business in China is true, but it's actually apples and pears. I like to bring this always to the table in MOFCOM and others to get their attention. But in fairness, in the US, 98% of our business is mergers and acquisition. In China, we are stacking up greenfield projects. So it's interesting to see that in average, greenfield European business is 8 billion to 9 billion every year. Of course, given the size of the economy, it's peanuts. And we should really look into this, where are the hurdles? China always claims to be very open. In some segments, like chemistry, they are very open. But in the position paper the chamber comes up with every year, last year we had 960 recommendations, meaning 960 issues we want to get resolved. Unfortunately, it got worse. Now my successor had 1,058 to explain. So in a way, it's unfortunate that actually we think it's actually closing up. We have a word for it. We call it fatigue, promise fatigue, about having nice Sunday speeches. At the same time, we are facing, in particular in the service sector, a lot of constraints. The other thing that you mentioned, of course, is the fact that we like Chinese investment in Europe. At this stage, actually, China invests more in European Union than we invest in China. It's very ironic, particularly in the battery materials, which is great. We want to have more of Chinese investment in France or in Italy and other places, Germany, of course. But at the same time, we don't like to have borders coming up. But if it is tilted as it is right now, our politicians find it very hard to keep our market as open as it is right now. Well, when it comes to business leaders flocking into China, it's primarily checking out what is going on in the celestial kingdom, so to speak. The question is really, shall we stay or shall we go? Now, the question is, where shall we go? There's not much to offer. If you look into India, for example, you have a difference between the GDP of India and China, which at this stage is $15 trillion. So if China has a very lousy development pattern of 1% to 2% over the next 3 or 4 years, and India has 6%, still because of this base effect, China will be 17.5 trillion US dollars bigger than India today. So it will go from 15 trillion difference to 17.5. After that, India will possibly narrow the gap. So in short, the difference in market size of Europe, China and India in 2028 will be the size of the entire economy of the European Union. So what choices do we have? So in essence, we see companies leaving China, Stellantis and Ford and Mitsubishi and others. And the others basically have to consider, am I going to stay there? We call it the fight or flight scenario. And I can assure you in the car industry, the Germans are going to stay, as we will also be in chemicals. So for us, no option there.
Well, thank you. So I think the underlying tone of your message is that the next China is still China. Yeah. But if I can follow up with another question, Jörg. Well, I think in the last 3 years, if I'm not wrong, there has been no new European companies investing in China fresh. Right? So that, I think, says a lot. I mean, COVID notwithstanding, no new European company set up in China. On the other hand, I remember when I joined Temasek 7 years ago, there were maybe about 5 countries in the world that have some kind of FDI screening mechanism. And they're usually run by very lazy people in a very lazy department because there's nothing much to screen. And FDI is to be welcomed. But these days, I can't remember how many EU countries have got some kind of FDI screening mechanism that has been introduced. And shall we just say that is probably targeted in China. So if that is the case, what gives you the optimism that either way there appears to be either a lack of incentive or a desire for perhaps greater resilience in supply chain, and a lesser dependence and higher screening mechanisms.
Well, it is a far more politicized environment we have to operate in. First of all, of course, indeed, we have more screening mechanisms in Europe, but put in perspective, we have no negative list in Europe. China does. Second, we have screening, but mostly these projects get approved. There is virtually no protectionism in Europe. We have, I think, 5 or 7 cases where there was denial. So that pales in the fact that how many challenges we face in mainland China. I think really the leadership in Beijing has to understand that if they want us as allies in Europe, they have to open the doors more in China in order to be a credible voice in Europe that China is open and playing with us. We don't want to decouple. We made a study in the European Chamber a while ago showcasing the downsides, the dangers of decoupling, and we have been promoting de-risking. Now, to some, it sounds like decoupling with European characteristics, but I assure you that actually it is, first of all, the attempt to showcase we have to stay in touch, we have to stay engaged. And again, we showcase the possibilities, the recommendations in order to have more trade and more foreign direct investment. De-risking also means that we have to look into areas where we are very dependent on China, where China might have a political leverage. That's pharmaceutical precursors, APIs, that is the areas of vitamin B, on magnesium, rare earth, and so forth, which is a tiny part of what we are doing. So I think we find it important, as we actually see China doing this since years already, de-risking. They just call it different. They call it dual circulation.
Well, thank you. So the outcry of hoping China will even open more for European investment into China has been the comment. And I know the chargé from China is actually in our midst today, and I'm sure he would have taken note of what you just said. Any other panelists on the stage would like to comment on what Woodgate York has just commented on, anything on European investment, global investment into China? Just want to pause here to see any of our panelists would like to add anything. No? Okay. Let me move on to Southeast Asia. Well, moving to Southeast Asia, meaning I'm moving on to CISA in particular, right? So as America's oldest ally in the Indo-Pacific, now Philippines' foreign policy under President Marcos now appears to be moving away from its previous pro-China stance under the Duterte administration. Now, beginning this year, Philippines granted the U.S. access to 4 more military bases, including strategic locations facing Taiwan. Well, the Philippines Coast Guards, of course, have complained that the Chinese ships have performed dangerous maneuvers near its vessels close to the Spratly Islands. In fact, 2 Philippines vessels collided with Chinese Coast Guard ships near the Second Thomas shore only a few days ago. On the other hand, China has been Philippines' top import supplier. And in the first half of this year, China surpassed USA and Japan to become Philippines' largest export market. So despite long-standing dispute in the South China Sea, economic relations between Philippines and China seems to be a case of business as usual. So that said, the US-Philippines partnership remains, shall we say, impregnable. To the admirations of many, I'm sure, are in the room here as well, Philippines excels in the oxygenating nature of political foxtrot between US and China. So the question for you, Cesar, is twofold. What is it that Philippines has mastered that the rest of us would do well to know? And second, what is the ASEAN role in shaping a multipolar world for the good of humanity?
Thank you, Robin. First, before I answer the question, I do not speak for the Philippine government, and neither was I defense minister or foreign minister. I was more on the finance space. It's very hard to be a master of something in this ever-changing world that we live in, especially in a Philippine political system where we change presidents every 6 years. No? So clearly, I think what we need to master and what we're trying to master is to know your country. Now, in the case of the Philippines, we know we are a small country. And as a small country, we need to engage the world. we have over 10 million overseas workers working all over the world. We also know that the relationship between countries are multidimensional. There's lots of area of similarities and collaboration. There may be areas of differences. The other thing we know in the Philippines is that we are better off as part of a broader ASEAN. That ASEAN is an advantage for us, especially the smaller countries. Last two things, we also know that China is an important market and will continue to be an important trading partner of the Philippines. And finally, globalization, as the DPM mentioned, is an asset to us. And that is why, despite the differences that we may have on some islands in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea, as we call it, our trade continues to grow. And it's not unique to us, because China is not just an export market that ultimately exports to either the EU or the US. It's becoming a final consuming market. And it's going to be our market for the future. And that's why, despite these issues, we have a lot of common interest. And therefore, again, quoting the DPM, it's crucial that the South China Sea is a sea of peace and prosperity rather than a sea of conflict, because stability and peace is crucial to economic growth. Going to the second part of your question, what is ASEAN's role to us and to the region and to the whole world in general? ASEAN can help chart a path towards common prosperity for all regions. And by chart, I'd like to define it by letters. C, as a convener of great powers. ASEAN does that very well. Twice a year, we invite leaders of the leading countries to talk face to face and discuss issues, and to be able to be honest about the challenges each one faces. I think this is very important in an ever complex world we live in. Second, we need to understand that in ASEAN, we are, just to make sure, we continue to be the hub of global and ASEAN trade. When it was designed, ASEAN was designed to maintain peace during the time when a lot of the ASEAN countries were facing the threat of communism. But later on, it became an opportunity for ASEAN, the least threatening of all regions in Asia, to become the hub of Asia trade. I think we need to continue to be that. And we've proven that because ASEAN trade right now, 2/3 of trade is based on FTAs. And the trade intensity of ASEAN is at 90%. A is to be a role model for macroeconomic stability. ASEAN, since the Asian crisis, has learned the lessons from that episode and has operated with fiscal and macroeconomic responsibility. And I think that's a very good model for other countries to follow. R is for being a role model for regional cooperation. ASEAN as a group of 10 countries really is a very diversified group. But despite our differences, we've been able to move forward from the 60s to where we are right now as one of the growth engines of the world. And finally, again, the DPM mentioned this earlier, we want to be transition leaders to the digital and the green economy. And that's how I see the role of ASEAN, helping chart for a way towards win-win economic path for different regions of the world, Robin.
Well, thank you, Cesar, for that very thoughtful comment. And Questions are starting to come in, and if I may ask the QR code to be displayed again, so that perhaps more of you might be enticed enough to actually download the QR code and to participate in raising your question online. So the first question from the floor for Ambassador Ching, actually. Well, for those of us who do not know, Ambassador Ching was Singapore's very first Director of Joint Intelligence of the Singapore Armed Forces, in addition to his very distinguished career in diplomacy. Now, the question is, one of the unexplained truths about Hamas attack on Israel, so we're moving quite quickly from China to Southeast Asia to now the Middle East, was the seemingly massive intelligence failure by Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, as we all know, of course, alongside with it, CIA and MI6. So this gentleman obviously knows about intelligence. The world was shocked that the attack of such magnitude went undetected. How could this be possible? What happened?
Well, I'll try my best to answer this question, and I think we need to be a bit circumspect, because well, story first. When I was in the military, I did have interactions with the Israeli intelligence, in particular military intelligence. I got to know people like Ehud Barak, who later became chief of staff and later rose to be prime minister. I know something about the Israeli intelligence. They are an elite service by design, and a friend of mine, the chief of military intelligence after Ehud Barak, told me that, explained to me the priority that is given to intelligence. That is absolutely the top priority. The intelligence outfits are elite services by design. And this is a reflection of the founding fathers' wisdom that for Israel, a small country with no strategic depth and dependent on a the reservist mobilization, you get the reservists to join in the fighting. All this takes time, and therefore the first-class intelligence may be able to compensate for this disadvantages. I know, well, as I said, I know the Israeli intelligence, they are first-rate by design. Now the question is, why is it that this operation has been, there has been such a major failure in major intelligence failure? An operation of this scale, we are talking about 3,000 rockets and hundreds of men, and if not more, takes weeks or months to prepare. It is inconceivable with the Israeli capability, intelligence capability, that it is not able to pick up some of these preparations. So this I find very intriguing. And there are many explanations, of course, and we will soon find out. We will find out in due course. The first is underestimation of Hamas. They may not think that Hamas can possibly pull together such an elaborate operation against the Russians. The Israelis. But I think there is another factor that is very important, just based on my experience in intelligence. Because intelligence are tools of state. Okay, they answer to political masters, and they take the cue from political masters. And if you look at the progress of the negotiations on how to settle the Palestinian issue, I remember Ehud Barak. He offered supposedly the best deal ever to the Palestinians, he was talking about two-state solution. He was talking about even East Jerusalem. He also offered sovereignty over the Temple Mount to the Palestinians, which was a very dangerous offer because it requires a lot of courage. But it never materialized. The agreement never materialized because Arafat at that time wanted more, and it never happened. Subsequent to this, there were a whole series of meetings to try to settle the Palestinian-Israeli issue, but no progress has been made. So as the intelligence agencies, a lot, they, as I said, they are tools of state. They take the cue from the political masters. It is possible that because the political masters seem to show that they are happy with the status quo, that the Palestinians in Israel can be just bottled, fenced in West Bank and Gaza, and there is no reason to change the status quo. If that is the case, if that is the sense that the intelligence organization picks up, then I think they will switch. They will deal with the policing function to police the status quo, and that's where the problem is.
Yeah,
I think. But anyway, as I said, it's premature to find out.
Thank you, Ambassador. The questions are really coming in, and let me ask 3 questions, all for you, Caesar. And I would just need a very quick response because we do have a few more questions that we want to cover here as well. Question number 1, however, it does appear that immediately after the change of the president, the stance currently taken by the president play into the U.S. allied narrative. That's the first question. Second question, the presence of USA military in the South China Sea, is it a stabilizing or stabilizing factor? 3, should Philippines use ASEAN as a front to resolve issues with regard to China rather than allow 4 bases to be set up by the US?
What was the first question?
The first question is that, however, it does appear that immediately after the change of the president, that the stance that currently taken by the president has played into the US allied narrative. Yeah, you can choose to respond or not respond, of course.
Yeah, well, as pointed out by Robin earlier, our historical alignment has been with the US. The Philippines was a colony of the US before the war, no? But having said that, since after the war, the Philippines being in Asia has realized that being in Asia is it's important to engage your neighbors, Japan included and China included. One, I think the shift from China to the US is just a correction of the shift from the previous administration. And I think we have to look at this as from the political standpoint. And as I mentioned, we have a presidential system that is 6 years, and who knows, in the next one, there will be another shift. But the more important point to look at are our permanent interests, which I mentioned earlier. Now, ASEAN does help in conflict resolution from the standpoint of focusing on commonalities, the win-win aspect of being neighbors and putting aside the issues that we face with, which are lose-lose from a political standpoint. No, it can never be resolved. It just has to be put on the side, and we focus on the more positive things between the relationships.
Thank you. Move on to before I move on, maybe I have to right. So, Professor Zhao, I'd like you to, if I may, think of this setting as a graduate student class in Peking University, where you are the Dean of the School of International Studies and you are giving a lecture, right? So the topic of the lecture is US-China relations in the context of an emerging new world order. Now, so this is the classroom. This is the size of your class, graduate class, right? Now the setting is very familiar to you, and the only difference is that the classroom is quite a bit larger, and the student body probably not as smart. So now that I have totally offended the audience, I probably won't get invited next year. But it will greatly help the audience if you can describe what this new order, which many describe as a multipolar world, is and is not. And what are the key features that must be present in a resilient, peaceful, and prosperous world order. It will also greatly help the audience and your students if you can describe who are the key actors in this new world order, what does each of them represent and bring to the table to contribute to a resilient, peaceful, and prosperous world. And it will, again, greatly help your students if you can describe the likely pathway or prerequisites from where we are today, that many describe as the beginning of the great power rivalry, to the destination, hopefully, that is the multipolar world. And maybe you can also give us a reason for optimism. Over to you, Professor.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. You give me a tall order. First of all, I think the current international order is not going to go away. It was established in the wake of the Second World War, and it has been working, even though it is facing various kinds of difficulties. Okay. People interpret the current international order in two different ways. People in the West tend to focus on certain set of values, especially taking an ideological perspective, like human rights, democracy. But people of many other countries tend to look at the international order from a more secular perspective, focusing on values that are, like sovereignty, non-use of force in resolution of international disputes, free trade. So these are pragmatic values. So I think the current international order is under, will remain, but then it will experience some fundamental changes. Okay. First of all, we're going to see a balance change. We are seeing, and we are going to see the continuation of the change in balance of power. Okay. The order used to be dominated by the West, is led by the US. Okay. Now the power is being diluted to different players, China and India, for example, to rising economies. And this leads to a second change. That is the view of the international order. I mean, the Western view that's focused on individual rights, especially civil and political rights, is going to be more and more challenged by the more secular view of the international order, focusing on sovereignty, territorial integrity, peaceful resolution of international disputes, that sort of thing. Okay. And the West's ability to uphold its view of the international order is eroding. If you look at the past, 20 years, the West's share of the world's GDP, I mean, G7's share of the world's GDP has declined very drastically. Okay. Now it's about 1/3 of the world's GDP. It used to be, 70 or 80% of the world's GDP, okay? Or at least 60% of the world's GDP. Has declined drastically. This leads to the third change, that is uncertainty. What are we going to do with this kind of situation? Neither the West nor the rising economies or countries are used to the new situation. Okay? They find it difficult to adapt. That to some extent explain why we are facing the problems and challenges we are facing today, okay? Especially the confrontation between China and the U.S. But over time, I think they have to reach some kind of accommodation. Okay? Over time, they have to face the reality and find some ways to peaceful coexistence. The current efforts between China and the US to reach out to each other can be explained in this context. Okay? Confrontation will all end up in disaster. Okay? And the only way for us to promote our security and economic prosperity is to seek new mechanisms or ways of accommodating each other's interests, and then find ways not only to peacefully coexist, but also to peacefully prosper. And in the process, we work together to deal with various kinds of global challenges. So I'm not sure whether how successful and how long it would take for us to find a grand a deal of accommodation. But this is something that we have to do. And I think eventually we are going to get there. That's the optimism I give you in my remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Jia. I guess the optimism lies in the fullness of time that we will get there. Well, thank you. Quick question from the audience, and I will pose that to York to begin with, and then quick comment from Ambassador and the Professor as well. How is China looking to counter the Western's negative narrative, especially given the challenges that China is facing both internally as well as internationally? How is China going to counter the Western negative narrative?
I think recommendation number one is open up your markets more, create more jobs in Europe, basically demand more. I mean, the fact that we are exporting 23% more into China than into Switzerland just tells you the size of the problem. China is a far more promising market than we can actually serve. The second, I guess, is try to be a little bit more showing empathy towards a problem that Europe really has at its borders. Is Ukraine. There was this discussion about getting 18,000 Ukrainian kids back from Russia. China could have been a facilitator. Second, to safeguard the nuclear power station that has been threatened. And then the third is maybe have a major prisoner of war. We haven't seen China responding to these ideas that Zelensky and other leaders in Europe have been voicing. So in a way, it's baby steps that China can take. It would be to its advantage. And then let's see what the momentum is going to be. I think Europe is still very open, again, for business in import as well as in investment. The negativity that we have in some states, for example, Sweden, is countered by some more optimistic and positive approaches like Hungary and Greece. So Europe as a whole is not turning anti-Chinese, but of course, a trade imbalance, and with the forthcoming massive tsunami of car exports from China into an open economy like Europe, as India, Korea, Japan, US possibly are closed for these electric vehicles, will cause more tension. So in a way, we still have time left in order to actually do baby steps in the right direction.
Well, thank you. Some very concrete and constructive suggestions over there. And Professor and Ambassador, comment on how can China do better in terms of responding to negative Western narrative about China?
Well, we have a lot to do to further open up and to address some of the legitimate concerns on the part of the European, American, and foreign companies in general. At the same time, I think the current level of trade imbalance has a lot to do with high-tech restrictions in export to China. Okay? So the Europeans and the Americans, they have to reflect what they can do to address this kind of situation. They cannot produce the kind of consumer goods at the same quality and same price as the Chinese company can. Okay, so their comparative advantage is high technologies and certain industries. So somehow a lot of technologies are under restriction for exports to China. So if you want to resolve or moderate the trade imbalance problem, you have to do more in that regard. And the de-risk is fine. Every country is de-risking. But to do too much on de-risking, the problem is where you draw the line. If you draw the line too wide, then you don't export anything that of your comparative advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. I think between export control and opening more of the domestic market lies a whole universe for political wisdom. So on that note, Professor Ching, any comment on what China can do better?
Many years ago.
Mike.
Many years ago, I met Wang Yi when he was, I think, Deputy Director General.
Deputy Director General. Okay, that's a few years ago. Yeah.
Yes. And we got along very well, and we discussed all kinds of subjects. But on narrative, international opinion is more or less shaped by narratives. Different countries put out the narratives. But we agreed that actually China has got a very serious inherent disadvantage. Because to begin with, the global language, the global lingua franca is English. And the Chinese narrative, to be able to put across Chinese narrative, half the time they're depending on the Western media to interpret for them. For example, if you take the example of Deng Xiaoping's Tao Guangyang Hui, you left the interpretation to the West. So the West comes up with a very sinister sort of interpretation that they call it hide and bite, right? So first you hide and then you are bidding for the time to where you can come up. So I think this, in terms of narrative, that the narrative war, that is very important, and I think Russia and China has got a huge disadvantage. I think they're trying to address it now with the establishment of CGTN and so on, but it will take a long time before.
I think to round up the session, I have one more question for you, Ambassador. Now, for years, this very panel is guilty of talking about Taiwan, right, as the most dangerous flashpoint globally. But then Russia caught the world by surprise by invading Ukraine. Then barely 3 weeks ago, a Palestinian Islamic militant group, Hamas, launched a series of attacks on Israel in what was described as the bloodiest in Israel history since the Holocaust. Now, many agree that the last thing the US wants is yet another Middle East war. This because it undermines US three most pressing, important foreign policy interests right now. 1, help Ukraine wrestle free from Russia and to join the West. 2, containing China. And 3, shaping a pro-US bloc in the Middle East that includes Israel and moderate Arab countries, therefore countering Iran and radical Islam. So we have it. Two hot wars that took the world by surprise, and Taiwan that, despite all the talk, did not turn into a war, or at least not yet. So what I'm about to ask is beyond the comprehension of most people, so it's only natural that I should ask you. So the question is, are the three of them, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, and Taiwan, interrelated in some ways? Or could this be the manifestation of something much bigger, a much bigger place, forces at play? And if so, what might that be?
Wow, this is a big question. But I think if you are talking about a common thread that goes through all these three items that you're talking about, it is the U.S. Basically, all roads lead to Rome, okay? Because the Americans, as you have rightly put it in your question, they have strategic interest in this area, and they pressing strategic interest in this area, they would like to promote them. Then the question is whether the Americans will continue to have the will and the wherewithal to pursue this interest. Okay. In the case of Russia, let's take it apart one at a time. Russia, well, you could argue it, but anyway, Russia was pressed into a war with Ukraine. And the American war games is unbelievable. I never heard of such war games, such ambitious war games before. First, to defeat the Russian army in the field. Second, regime change in Moscow. Third, to keep Russia permanently weak in the future. I think these war aims reflect the overconfidence of the Chinese. If you look at the situation now, has the Ukrainian gained the upper hand? I don't think so. The recent counteroffensive never came to anything because they were not able to breach the Russian defense line. And in fact, there's a danger that the momentum may shift over to the Russian side. But, well, it's a stalemate. And meanwhile, the Ukrainians are in a difficult situation because it's not just a matter of money, it's not just a matter of weapons, even though they are very important. The problem is that they're running out of men, soldiers, because of the enormous casualties that they have suffered. The soldiers, which is some estimates, put them at about hundreds of thousands, and wounded even more. So they're running out of men. How it progresses, we don't know. But in the meantime, the West, there are reports coming up all over the place that the West are beginning to feel fatigued. There's a Ukraine fatigue, both in the US and in the Europe. And Europe. I think China, who is not directly involved, but indirectly, very clever, playing a clever game in this, that it is not in China. It is to the advantage of the Chinese that Russia becomes weakened. So drag the warfare. Then Putin will have no choice but to partner with China, and in this partnership, Russia is definitely a junior partner. Secondly, the Ukraine war has produced, after 2 years into the Ukraine war, there are signs of fatigue in both the US and the European countries, the alliance of the West. If the alliance If the fatigue becomes very, very important, then there's a possibility that you will see maybe armistice established, with the Russians keeping the land that they have annexed in the Donbass. On the battlefield, I think the situation is not going well with the Ukrainian forces because they have not been, the counter-offensive has not been able to achieve any of its objectives. It's not even able to penetrate the main Russian defense lines. So meanwhile, people are watching, I think the Chinese are watching the fatigue setting in the US and the West. The key is to exhaust. I think the key is to exhaust. There have already been instances of signs of exhaustion. For example, the ammunition requirement by the Ukraine. It's just not possible, it's not available. From what I understand, 155 ammunition, 155 millimeter artillery ammunition is just in short supply. It's just in short supply. And American production capability is not able to match the requirement. And the West and the European allies, they find it difficult to continue supplying money and weapons to the Ukraine. So we don't know. I think the situation is, I would say, a stalemate, but with an advantage right now to the Russians. In the end, I think what happens in Ukraine will be decided on the battlefield. And the situation doesn't look so good for the Ukrainians at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I think I know that Ambassador Ching very rarely accepts invitation to speak on public forums such as this. So very privileged and grateful that he has accepted our invitation to do so. And that was, of course, a master class on military intelligence and military strategies. I think that we already hear in a public session such as this. I've just been given 9 minutes more by the organizer. I want to thank you for your provision of the time, which allows me to ask one last question, of course, and that would be, I think, the Belt and Road Initiative. After all, we had the third BRI summit that was concluded in Beijing just very recently, and a good person to start perhaps on this would be Professor Jia. Let me just ask the question here. Now, at the recently concluded third BRI summit in Beijing, China announced an injection of $100 billion in new and green financing to help developing countries to find low carbon and climate resilient growth paths, while of course benefiting Chinese businesses and in-country businesses all at the same time. Now, in the first 10 years of BRI, China provided $500 billion US dollars in financing, roughly what the World Bank provided in that period of time as well. So those over 10 years, China provided about $500 billion in financing for BRI, which is roughly the same of what the World Bank provided to the rest of the world. So China claims that BRI has lifted 40 million people out of poverty, but many in the West remain unconvinced, believing that China's real purpose is to construct a China-led world order in which unsavory regimes can thrive. So now there are 154 member states inside the BRI, and that is 80% of the United Nations' 193 nation states. So even though some of them will not benefit from signing a non-binding BRI agreement with China, this is nonetheless a picture of countries whose aspiration for their relationship with China far outweigh their concerns. So let me pose this question. So even if a China-led world order may not be China's intent, it may well become an outcome whether China want it or not. Do you agree?
Well, certainly, in the as the world order evolves, China, and as China rises, China is going to play a larger role. Okay? And China has more and more stake in the current international order. At the same time, it's not happy with certain aspect of it. Okay? Especially, when you talk about the World Bank, when you talk about the IMF, why, the World Bank president has to be American? Why the IMF president has to be European? Okay, what are the reasons for that? Okay. In the past, they say it's because of our economy. We have larger economies, but now the economic situation has changed. Why hasn't it changed? Okay, so there are many questions with regard to the existing international order that remain to be addressed. Okay, the order has to adapt in order to survive, in order to play its useful role as it has done for many years in the past. Okay, we want to build a new order on the basis of the existing order. Not to replace it, but to improve on it. And China will find its role in this order, in this process. And of course, China has to reflect its own situation and how to improve itself to make it more attractive to the world at the same time. Okay, thank you.
And any comments from other members on the panel?
Well, we had a great show in Beijing on Belt and Road Initiative, and it has brought benefits to a couple of countries. Infrastructure improved, and sure, there were some debt problems, but overall, I would say it has brought some real good bridges and good places for particular countries like Africa and so forth. But at the same time, I must always marvel about the spin doctor in Beijing. They always manage to put on big numbers, big flags, big shows and everything. And we Europeans are unable in order to counter that because we're doing much more than China. If you look into the stock of foreign direct investment outside our own economies, like Europe, for example, you see that the largest foreign direct investor globally is European Union companies. It's a stock of $22 trillion. US is 12, China is 1.9, Japan is 1.5. We're nearly 10 times as big. And as companies, it's not governments, it's not organizations, we don't have import-export shows, we don't have it's just companies going global, looking for markets. So in a way, sometimes we have to put this in perspective. I rather like to have less shows in capitals, but more open markets so Chinese companies can invest in Europe and we can invest more in Africa and other places. The same applies basically to the fact that Europe stands for 43% of overseas direct assistance, meaning we are giving grants and not just having loans. And the magnitude is 43%. 43% on all of these coming from European Union. So in a way, we have nothing to be shy about. We possibly have to just learn how to spin it better, and maybe Beijing can educate us on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, any other comments?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think Europeans and the Americans, they have played their own roles in overseas investment and also in developmental assistance. China is catching up. I think it's a great pity that some people in our own countries tend to view the other party's efforts as some kind of a conspiracy, part of a conspiracy, part of a bad story. Okay, I think probably we need to work together. Okay? China has its BNR, and Europeans have their own, initiatives, and Japanese have their own initiatives. Why don't we work together on the projects where our, initiatives overlap? Okay, I think in the process of doing it, we can share the risks, and at the same time we can also share the benefits. Okay, it's good for everyone. Thank you.
Well, clearly, from the outside, looking at things, the tentacles of the Chinese order is developing, expanding quite rapidly. BRICS will not be BRICS without China, and it's growing in its membership. RCEP will not be RCEP without China in the center of it, as the largest economy. Right? AIIB will not be AIIB if not China's initiating for it. And you mentioned about World Bank and IMF will not have. I imagine your undertone was that China cannot be at the leadership table for that. And there's China-African dialogue, which is growing year on year. There's a Shanghai dialogue, China's economic and political interaction and discussion with Central Asia. Then there's, of course, the Belt and Road Initiative. I think I mentioned 7. That's a lot of tentacles, and it's not something that a country without ambition, ability, and resources can contemplate. So I think we're at the cusp of a time in the world where we are indeed looking at the multiple tentacles of multiple powers coming together, and hopefully they will provide for us a very sumptuous meal for humanity. So let me just conclude the session by giving each member 10-20 seconds time to wrap up today's session, or any thoughts that you have on your mind that you'd like to share with the audience. Caesar, can I start with you? I'll go this way.
China is a very big part of the future, especially of Asia, and we need to engage with them on a win-win basis. Focus on what we can do together and not focus on our differences.
Thank you. Ambassador, final words?
Sorry. One thing that is true is that the current global system, governance system, the UN, the Bretton Woods institutions, the WTO, they were created a long time ago, immediately after the post-World War II. I don't think it reflects current reality today, because in the meantime, many countries have gone up, and we are talking about the multipolar world, right? So the question is whether there are any chances of amending the rules of these institutions to accommodate, because these institutions are not regarded as reflecting current day realities. So, for example, talking about the UN reform, which is a complicated process, why is England and France still members of the Security Committee, the permanent member of the Security Council with veto power? The British economy is nothing, very small, and equally the French economy. But other rising powers like India, among, they can't find to be able to expand and play a greater role in this kind of organization. In which case, the tendency will be to form their own alliances. Mm-hmm. So, if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, this year they just admitted 6 new members, all very significant members: Saudi, Iran, Argentina. These are very, very important players, and they are joining the BRICS and and dozens of countries are queuing to join. So I think it's a matter of, because you're not able to change the original governance structure, because you can't do it, your interests are not represented, and therefore you create your own. So I think it's very interesting trends to watch.
Thank you. York.
Well, to Professor Jia's point, cooperation is possible. The shining example to me is Beijing-based AIIB. I think all of us know that they do great risk management, great environmental scrutiny. And I must really say that Europe and other countries across the world with China work together brilliantly there. And it's very interesting, actually, that they hardly fund anything in Belt and Road Initiative countries.
And finally, Professor.
Well, the world politics has been too much affected by negative people in recent years. By negative people, I'm talking about the extreme ideologues, racists, ideological, what do you call this? Religious fundamentalists, and all these people, okay, they have come up with all kinds of conspiracy stories about our countries. I think it's time for the kind-hearted people, the more pragmatic people to unite and try to make the world or change the world for the better. Thank you.
So let's put pragmatism way ahead of ideology. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, will you please thank our panelists?